welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I am one of the hosts today, AJ Alonso, joined by my fantastic co-host, Alex Ellison. How you doing, Alex?
Oh, now I'm doing fantastic.
I just inserted the adjective in there for you. I could have been like my lousy co-host, Alex, down to the dumps immediately.
And then I'd be doing lousy. It's a good point. I should probably stop basing my mood off of how you introduce me.
I don't want to have that much power. Alex, we're joined by, I'm going to do it again, fantastic guest, Maggie Blume, sales evangelist over at Mailshake. Maggie, how are you?
I am doing super well, like we talked about earlier. Yeah, it's doing super great. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to jump in to our conversation today. You over at Mailshake have been talking a ton about email engagement, deliverability, how to help SDRs. And I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation about it. Really looking forward to digging in. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of everything, though, let's learn a little bit more about you, your overall kind of path into the world of sales, what you do at Mailshake, what Mailshake does. Just, paint the audience a broad picture of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. I was just talking about this the other day, but I actually started my career out in accounting, which people typically find is a bit strange to switch over to sales. But the meaning of why I got into sales, and honestly, like, I didn't think this would be where I'm at today with it, but the reason why I got into it was just to become more extroverted, which is so funny to me now thinking back, because more of like my introverted self has definitely helped me in sales more than just like, I don't think you could just like become extroverted. I mean, maybe you can, there's some people out there, but I definitely have become more outgoing. But yeah, I feel like my listening skills have helped me a lot more. But yeah, so I started out in sales about 4.5 years ago. And I started at Mailshake about 3 years ago as an SDR, moved up to become an AE, and then now, as of recent, like you mentioned, a sales evangelist. And Mailshake is a sales engagement platform. What differentiates us is our education around cold email and cold outreach, and also a lot of our education around deliverability, which we'll get into today. But I love working at Mailshake. I love talking about cold email, and I think it's fun that, like, I'm sales. I tell people, like, I'm a salesperson selling sales software to other salespeople. So I just think it's fun that I get to do that, and you get to learn a lot about sales all day. So yeah, it's kind of what's bringing me here today.
The trifecta of sales and sales.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm excited to dig in. You actually, I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit for our audience. I typically write an outline for all of our episodes going into these so that we have some basic groundwork laid out. But you kind of did that for me, because I peeked at your LinkedIn profile, and right away in the bio, you mentioned 3 things, all of which I kind of want to touch on today. You said that you are there on LinkedIn to help SDRs with cold outreach cadences, boosting open rates with email, hint, it's all about deliverability, and interviewing buyers to help SDRs and fellow sellers. And I figure, well, that seems like a really good basis for a conversation. So I do.
Glad I could help.
I want to hit on all 3 of those, these sort of individually, starting with the last one, helping sellers understand how buyers buy. I know you ran a video series about that, interviewing some buyers, kind of digging into, like, how do you like to buy something? How do you like to be prospected? And in turn, helping SDRs learn from that. Would love to just learn some of the bigger takeaways that you kind of got from running that series, and how they helped impact some of the content you create, some of the stuff that you do at Mailshake to help educate other reps, anything in that realm.
Yeah, I think you spun my question that I ask on that podcast or that series a lot nicer than I ask it, of how can we help sellers? And that's the ultimate goal. But the question that I typically ask to buyers is, what's your biggest pet peeve? Yeah. I know isn't always the nicest question, but I think, like, people are more open to talk about something that annoyed them, like, gossiping with your friends or something, given the tea. But the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway I had from that series was sales can actually be pretty simple if we kind of step back from all these processes that we have in place. So of course, processes work, playbooks work, templates work. all these different things work, but we have to remember at the end of the day, we're dealing with another human. I shouldn't say deal, but we're interacting, engaging, creating a relationship with another person on the other side. And I think it's really easy for sales reps to forget that because there's a lot of other things that they're thinking of, like quota. Who's not thinking about that? Well, my boss told me this email works. My boss or a colleague of mine said that, it usually takes 3 calls to close someone, all those different things. And what I heard from buyers was they feel like locked into this process they don't like they don't want to buy that way. And I'm not saying like change your whole process for every single buyer that comes in, but like listen to them, ask them like, hey, how do you like to be communicated to when, I'm following up with you? Or, like, do you want to get on another call? Does this make sense? Things like that. So just making sure and remembering that there's a human on the other side with incorporating a lot of, those templates or playbooks, because your manager puts things into place to help you succeed too. And you shouldn't ignore those things either.
Yeah. I think we've said it on this podcast a few times, and I know I've written about it a bunch, but like sales is inherently human to human, not B2B or B2C or C2C, if that even exists. But like, it's you're, like you said, you're a human interacting with another human. And that has to be taken into account when you can insert best practices and top performing templates and the right cadences and whatever. Like all of that is good. You're right. That's the valuable stuff that you should build a foundation off of. But if someone you're talking to is like, hey, never email me, I only want to talk on the phone about stuff like this, and your cadence has like an email step in it, don't just drop an email their way. Like, don't listen to your cadence. Like they actually told you, please give me a call. It's like little things like that I think you're right. You get so muddied with like all of the day-to-day minutia of being a rep that you can just like forget sometimes that that's another person telling you something, and that can help you push it to accelerate a deal down the pipeline if you just listen to them.
For sure. And I think that's the exciting part. Like, I don't know, when, I get like, my sister and my mom are both therapists, so they love telling me stories of like, how they interact with clients and things like that, and just human psychology in general. But yeah, I think that's like the awesome part of it. It's like there is a human on the other side. There's a way that they like to do things and not do things. And if you lean into that and learn more about them, I think it could just like make that process more enjoyable for yourself as the seller or the SDR, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes it fun.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely. And it also, the other thing that you guys briefly touched on is just the fact that there's so much outreach going on from an SDR that it's really easy and almost sometimes can be smarter to remove the human element with that original outreach, especially if you're sending 100 emails or like you pick up the phone, for the 4th time, he's not going to pick up again. It's really easy to fall into that and sort of almost protect yourself from the rejection that you're probably going to get by saying like, it's not personal, they're not a person. But then, the flip side of that is you sort of create this effect where you don't treat the good prospects like people either. And then that can snowball in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, not to keep going into this, but the same thing with, you're totally right. That was like the 4th call you did or the 100th email you sent, or this is like like I've done over 1,000 demos. Like this is the 1,000 demo. Oh, but this is the first time someone's taking a look at Mailshake. Like, remember that. Just because I've seen it 1,000 times, talked about it 1,000 times, how can we make it interesting? It's not an easy question to answer, but something to think about.
Yeah, I like that. All right, let's turn to the second part of your bio there, because this I think is the crux of the conversation, I guess I would call it, like the biggest part that I want to focus on, and what you really do at Mailshake and educating other sellers, like you were saying, it's boosting open rates. Your hint being that it's all about deliverability, something that I don't think a lot of people would immediately turn to when it comes to how can I help get more engagement in my email communication. Probably turn to changing up your subject line or tweaking your CTA or making your email shorter, like all of these things that we hear. Why is deliverability so important? Is it like, does it take priority over all of the things that I just mentioned?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I'm laughing because I kind of have a funny story. And this story probably has happened to me a few times, but a most recent one with a customer where we were going through an email campaign of theirs and they wanted to put branding in their I was about to say subject line in their signature, and like a logo
Mhm.
and like images somewhere else and just some things that weren't going to be great for deliverability. And we can get into that a little bit more as to why that wouldn't be great. But basically, I kind of said it in a nice way, like, hey, you don't want to put those things in there because it's going to hurt deliverability. Like, they look great. I love your logo, and how you wrote this. And they were like, but how am I supposed to get anyone to engage when my emails look really boring or they don't see my logo there? Like, that logo is going to be what makes me feel like not a spammer and there's actually a brand behind it. And I was like, well, if you have bad deliverability, no one's going to be reading those emails. No one's going to like ask if your logo's in there or anything like that. And it's kind of like a light bulb moment. Like, why should we care about this word deliverability? And I kind of like to have it at, like, it's really structured of like bad deliverability. If you're getting bad deliverability equals you're probably getting into a spam folder. And if you're getting into a spam folder, no one's reading your emails. And if no one's reading your emails, you're not going to get any results from it. And so that's why this is way more important than just like, tweaking subject lines or messaging and things like that. Like, this is the first step to it. And everything else is very important too, but deliverability is the most important.
Yeah, and I think that's right. That's what's difficult for a lot of SDRs or salespeople to understand, because it's not something they normally control, right? Normally they're like, let me change this. So let me move the levers I know how to move. And it's just not something you learn. It's not part of sales kickoffs. It's not part of the playbook, like how to make a deliverable email. Before we dive into, those levers they can pull, do you want to dive into some of that tactical stuff? You mentioned images are bad. Are there any like quick tips, hits that an SDR could just like take out of their email or out of the email today that'll just boost up those rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the email itself, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like links, don't use like I would say don't use links really whatsoever in cold emails if you can really avoid it. But if you're going to use it, just use one. There's no reason to put an image in there. Like, all this email is supposed to do when you're doing cold email is to, start a conversation there. So, yeah, images that's going to get you into a spam folder as well. Don't put HTML, things like that. But yeah, for an SDR, like, a playbook I kind of came up with before this call, actually, because I was trying to think of different things as we talked about it before, is like something you can control as an SDR AE is something I kind of like to call SCAR. And it has to do with the email, and it also has to do with your list too. So the first part of it, the S, is segment. So when you're writing these campaigns, you're getting a lot of data and it's really awesome, but don't just like put that data into one campaign. Segment by really unique things. So like, did that person just change their job? Does that person work at a company that sells this specific, thing? Or is that a specific target? So make sure you segment, because if you are changing up the messaging, even just a little bit to those different segments, it's going to help with deliverability. The C of it is clean. So SCAR, make sure that everyone on your list could be someone you could actually like, that they could actually buy from you. I'm not saying they have to be the exact decision maker, but again, we get really excited about this data. Don't just use the data because you have it. So that's a way that you can really like clean up that list, sift through things, make sure everyone on that list could be a potential yes to like carrying that conversation with you. And then the A of it would be analyze. There's analyzer tools out there for SDRs that are totally free. Like Mailshake has one, not to put my own plug in there. Glock Apps has one that's completely free, and HubSpot has a really great list of, spam words to avoid. And what an analyzer tool does is basically like skim your email, make sure that you don't have anything in there that looks spammy. So some of the things like I talked about earlier, like images, logos, things like that, totally free tool for a rep to use. And then the last thing is the R of it, which is revise. So you as a rep, you may have found an email copy that worked for you super, super well. And you had been using it, got success. Maybe you read it off of like one of my LinkedIn posts or someone's LinkedIn post out there. What worked for you when you read it, let's say that was 3 months ago, is probably copied by tons of other sales reps out there. So revise that copy. Revise it, even if it's just small things, but if like email servers are watching everything, and if they see that hundreds of sales reps are using that same type of verbiage or anything like that, then they're just going to start filtering those things into spam, because it's like a copy paste of things. So SCAR, segment, clean, analyze, and revise.
I like that. Nice and clean, to borrow a word that you used in the acronym itself. It's a clean way of thinking about just like the, like Alex, you said, the levers you can pull as an SDR. Because I think a lot of people look at deliverability as more of like an IT level or like systems administration type issue. Like, oh, I don't have any control over that. Like whether or not my email gets into someone's inbox. My job is to write the best email I can. But you're obviously saying that's not true. There are little things that you can do as a rep that you should be doing as a rep to make sure that your emails are getting in front of people, otherwise getting tossed into spam folders.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point of like the IT side of things. Like, yeah, don't feel like you have to be this IT person. Like I definitely am not. I lean on my IT team a lot at Mailshake in itself. But if you are a rep and you're learning about some of these things, and I'll just drop some keywords as like hints of something you could bring up to your IT team, it's probably going to make you look pretty cool as a rep that you're thinking about some of these things. But if you want to Slack them, the 3 things they should know about is DNS records, domain warming, and custom tracking domains. So I don't know if you want to take note of that, but those are 3 things you could just, you could just Slack your IT team. I mean, I couldn't go into depth of how to explain it. I know a lot just because I work at Mailshake, but yeah, just Slack them about it. Like, hey, do you know about these tools? Do you know about these things? And it'd probably win you some points as an SDR and make you stand out.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's not watching and just listening, I just made that all went over my head motion. Hence the giggling, but
yeah, tough if you're audio only on this one to get the joke. But yeah, thanks for explaining that, Alex.
Everyone loves a good joke explained, you know.
And I'll make sure to include in like the show notes for this some basic definitions of like what you were talking about, because I think you're right. Like, there's one thing as an SDR to think that it's totally out of your control, and there's another thing to know that it theoretically is in your control, and there are things you can do. But it's another step above that, where it's like, there are things I can do from like an individual contributor level to help my deliverability. And I know of things that my IT team can do to help me increase that even more. And if we work together on this, then like, you're creating win-win situations.
Totally.
I think it was Kyle Coleman who said it forever ago, but like one of the biggest things for SDRs to consider is that you want to be easy to root for. And if you come to the table with just complaints about like, hey, my emails are ending up in spam, not my fault, then you're not easy to root for, right? You're someone who just complains. But if you come with solutions, if you come with ideas on how you can partner with another department to help you, that's an opportunity for you to look, like you said, really cool to your IT team, but also to management. Like, you are looked at as someone who gets shit done. And that in and of itself is so much more valuable than someone who's just like, 75% deliverability, I can take it or leave it. Like,
yeah, that's just the way it goes. And it's like, no, be curious about these things. Like, yeah, I had no idea what any of those things meant, but just ask some questions about it and literally just type those words to them and see what happens.
I think actually, Alex, you might have said this in a somewhat recent episode of Opt-in, one of the show that we produce, where SDRs often think about the content of the email itself, not enough emphasis is placed on like where it's going. And in that case, it's like standing out in the prospect's inbox, making sure that like your subject line looks good, you have good preview text. Like, it's not just the same old, but that same mentality I think can be applied here. You kind of brought it up, Maggie, but like the idea that if you just copy and paste somebody else's template, not only will spam filters sort of catch that and go like, well, this is just the same stuff that all other reps are doing, we'll toss it into spam. But the eyeball test of the person you're sending it to can see that in the inbox and go, this is the 5th SDR today who sent me the same subject line. I'm not going to read this. And you immediately get deleted. So it's like you're competing both with actual tech who filters you away and the prospect's eyes who filter you away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like proactive, reactive spam. The proactive is the server that's just going to filter you right in there. The reactive one is, just like you said, the human eyeballs reading it. deleting it, or some people mark you as spam. I don't try to do that to SDRs, but yeah, that's like the reactive spam. You're going in there if they see like, hey, this is just another like prospecting email that I get all the time.
Right. And then does that trigger spam filters in the future to keep you out of inboxes more often, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, that's just a hit on you as like a sender. If you're getting marked as spam, then you have more likelihood of just like having this overall identity on your domain or your email address as a spammer. So then when you go to send emails again, and that's been happening a lot to you, yeah, then servers will just notice you as a spammer.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, is there a difference in like the challenges about making deliverability high between like an enterprise team that has maybe 50 SDRs, right? Tens of thousands of emails are going out at a time versus like a small company that might not have the same domain authority, but like at the same time is less recognized. I don't know if yeah, what the differences are there.
Yeah, I mean, it all just depends on like their activity individually. A server that has, a lot of reps on there, they probably have a lot of other placeholders in there to make sure people aren't going over certain limits or things like that. But you're right, they have like, depending on what company they work at, they may have really high domain authority to begin with. But it all starts like the way that spam kind of comes about and how you can be marked as a spammer, it really starts from the individual level and then kind of works backwards. So like Maggie today is sending, I don't know, 2,000 emails, and I put the word free and I don't know, diet pill in there or something. And I get marked as spam. Like my IT department is going to get notified right away, whether I'm with a big company or a small company, where we can kind of shut that down. I mean, even my own like email provider may shut me down for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain things you need to think about, but since it's on the individual level at first, that's kind of like where you need to pay attention to. So some of those things are going to be the same.
Yeah. Are there things that I feel like tossing the word free and sending out 2,000 emails and using diet pill, there's a pretty like obvious, like I shouldn't do that. As someone who knows nothing about like what catches a spam filter, I already know that's bad. Are there like hidden things that outside of what you had already mentioned that people aren't thinking about that maybe reps do every day? That's like common practice across a lot of SDRs or AEs that is impacting their deliverability?
And I think it comes back to like, SDRs have quotas of how many emails they should be sending out, or not quotas, but KPIs. And they also can have these great data tools that give them a lot of data. So they get excited about it. And then they have email automation, sales engagement platforms that can automate emails. At the end of the day, I would just say like, act like a human. Like we have all this AI automation, things like that. Like act like a human when you're sending out these emails. Can a human send out 1,000 emails in a day? No, they can send, I mean, maybe they could, but
that would take a long
manually.
He was dead.
Yeah, exactly. So like, don't send more than like you would send one-off emails in a day. Like automation is great, but like don't send over 100 emails or set that as like your limit in your sales engagement platform. And then like, and that's the way I like to think of it. So think like a human. Like, how would you send these emails just normally if you didn't have any of this automation? It's great that we have it. It's there to save time, but we still need to think about that. So don't send too many emails in one day or too many emails too fast. Optimize for engagement. When we send out an email to someone, just a one-off email, like think of sending it to your colleague, or when you all maybe sent me an email to be on this podcast, which I'm really thankful about, you probably wanted me to respond to that email. You weren't just sending it like, hey, hope she reads it. Like, no, you want, like when you're sending a one-off email to a colleague or a friend of yours, you're just doing it from your inbox, you want them to respond. Email servers notice that too. If you're not getting high engagement, that also can show you're a spammer. And I'm not saying you are, but you want to optimize to make sure that you're getting some replies from emails there. And then plain text, like I'm not just opening up Gmail and putting a bunch of images in there or links or things like that to send an email over to someone. So even though it might be exciting to send over certain things like, a case study or your website or things like that.
Think of the
Limited.
memes, Maggie. What do I do with all these memes to send them to my prospects?
Yeah, no, and you can get creative with it. I will say you can get creative with it, but the one thing I will say is that's also human-like is the first email you send over to someone, first cold email, is like your first impression. So for servers and spam filters. So if you're putting images in there, that's a first impression of you as a spammer. If you want to put a meme in there, wait till like the third email. After the third email, you've been clear, and it'll probably be fine if you're not like mixing that in with free and diet pill.
Oh, you can use the first. No, I was just going to say you can use the first 2 emails to tease them. Say, hey, I'll send you a meme if you respond.
Yeah, you could do it like that.
I'm curious, is it like a once you're in kind of situation? I know like obviously your deliverability can fluctuate based on like what you're doing with the text and with the amount of messages and all that stuff. But like say I'm emailing Mailshake and my email gets through to you, it gets in your inbox and you take a look at it. I see maybe that you've opened it a few times. Does that enough for me to be like, okay, like I'm in, I don't have to worry about getting tossed into a spam filter? Or like, can it happen on email 4 if I just royally mess everything up and my next email just sucks and it's all about diet pills?
Yeah.
Hammer that in the ground.
I'll start using a different example so people can learn some other ones in there. But theoretically, yes, but there are some things like, yes, but there are some things that could still get you into the spam folder. Like, let's say that person marks you as spam, then clearly you're going to the spam folder after that. So there's always like small nuances like that. But yes, for the most part, I'd say like probably 90% of the time, if you're in the clear on the first one, then you're going to continue unless like your domain reputation goes down. Or yeah, like they mark you as spam or like the 2 things.
So once you see them open the email, that's your opportunity to floodgates open up, memes go in, images go in, GIFs go in. Got it.
With caution.
Yeah. We don't
go crazy
that from this podcast. You didn't hear it from us. That's not how we roll. If you want to do it, by all means, but like you didn't hear it from us. Okay. Talking to you, audience. No, the last thing that you mentioned in your bio and the last sort of point that I want to hit on for this episode is you talk about helping SDRs with cold outreach cadences. Obviously, tying that in with deliverability, crafting like a good, solid cadence is like you need to have good deliverability for that to happen. Because with the multiple steps, like we were just talking about, maybe your first 2 get in, but then like domain reputation takes a hit. You get tossed into spam. They mark you as spam, whatever it might be. Are there different, I guess, like best practices around crafting like a good start to finish cadence that can improve your deliverability or kind of just like help you take advantage of the good deliverability you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes back to things that SDRs and AEs can definitely control. So yeah, when it comes to copywriting, I know I mentioned it before with the revise, but revamp your templates like at least every 3 months, if not more than that, or, more frequent than that. And don't be afraid to get creative with these types of things. I mean, if you need like an approval from your boss, definitely do that. But yeah, like the problem that some people have with deliverability and why you can start going into spam is like we talked about before. It's the reusing of the messages. It's reusing of tactics that worked a year ago and that people are sick of seeing. And spam folders are sick of seeing too. So revamp your templates, make sure your message is changing, because there's a difference between let's send 100 of the same template this month versus let's just send this template every single month since it was working. And then you're at the point of sending like thousands of the same exact message. It's not going to help with deliverability. So revise, like we talked about before, A and B testing. So it's kind of going back to you should be revising those templates, but with A and B testing, it sounds like, people always think like, oh, that's, it's going to help me pick out a winner subject line, but it's actually changing the messaging slightly. So email servers, your own, because your own watches you too, not just others. There's like 2 people in the sky watching you. They want to see that you're changing up your emails ever so slightly, that you're not sending the same 100 emails out, but 50. that's even going to help you. So just changing one thing. And yeah, it will help you test things of like a winning subject line there too. Um, yeah. And then, just kind of all those things that we talked about before. So avoiding any HTML, writing like a human, keeping subject lines pretty short so that people can see the preview of a message, then they're, more likely to open it there. Because you want to see those opens, you want to get that engagement too. So the last thing was optimize all of your emails for replies. I really don't have call to actions in my emails, and I don't tell other people to do it, to click on a link, because it's not optimizing for that back and forth conversation. And email servers want to know that you're doing that you're getting those responses instead of just like sending out 100 emails and just having some link clicks on there.
I have a specific question because I've noticed a good number of emails come into my inbox that the link is to their calendar. Does it, so and that gets me think versus like to a case study or to a piece of content, like does it matter what kind of thing is on the other side of the link, or are spam filters just like, nah, no thanks?
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. If you have like a rogue link that you accidentally put in there, I mean, that's going to make you look even worse. Like if it's a broken link or anything like that. But yeah, it doesn't matter if it's a calendar link or things like that. And it's not like the links are the worst things in the world. I just recommend not doing them for those two reasons of, it's not going to get you good engagement, and you still just have that chance of going into spam with it. But yeah, it doesn't matter what type of link.
I'm curious because I know it's a very popular, albeit like polarizing type of email that people typically kind of toss into cadences, the bubble up or like thoughts email. I want to get your thoughts on that email.
Oh no.
I didn't. But like when you're writing, start to finish a cadence that you're trying to engage someone, like you said, you want that back and forth conversation. And say like email 3, I get it a lot. Like more often than not, I would say email 3, sometimes email 2, just thoughts as like a follow up. Impact on deliverability, impact on like the reputation. You think from like your perspective of that seller, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, so it's funny. I wasn't really into those emails until we hired Jed as our head of outbound, Jed Marley, and he told me like all this success and showed me real campaigns of it working super, super well for him. So it works. From a deliverability perspective, you want to make sure it's kind of like a reply to that email, not like a brand new email. So that makes sense. Yeah.
I can't tell you the amount of times I've received one-off emails that are like obviously supposed to be in thread, and it just says that. I'm like, who is this person? What is this message?
Yeah, you don't want that happening. But it does work. I'm just like you said though, AJ, like how long is it going to work for if you're getting these all the time? That's the only thing I'm curious or I may have thoughts on. But yeah, so I'm just wondering how long it's going to be around that this is going to work.
Yeah, you never know. I think the biggest example of that type of that idea of like how long this is going to be around for me was years ago when I started as an SDR in 2013. And I want to say around then, maybe 2014 at this point, we had been sending out an email that had a ton of success. The subject line was, should I stay or should I go? And it was like a breakup email where it was like, hey, look, I've reached out 12 times or whatever it is. Haven't heard from you. Just give me a yes or a no and I can stick around. And it flashed in the pan, like ton of success in like maybe a month or two. We just got reply after reply after reply. It was like, we hit the gold mine. Like, this is it, everybody. And then it just stopped working like altogether. And it was that moment where I'm like, oh, like these things have a shelf life. Like these little tweaks or tactics or types of emails you can send out have a shelf life to the point where like no one, maybe they've seen it 100 times and they're like, forget this guy. I don't want to respond to this.
Yeah.
So there's situations like that pop up that I think speak to a lot of what you've talked about so far of just like be a human, realize that like this isn't going to work forever. This isn't always going to resonate with every person you send it out to. You have to keep revamping your templates and switching it up so that you don't get stale and just get ignored.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, of course, not getting stale there. And think about it, like people on your sales team, maybe told their friend who was also in sales, like, hey, listen to this subject line we did. And yeah, and then people started using it, which is cool. That means that you did a really cool thing. And, you had like great copy that worked and other people wanted to use it, but then it just gets stale. It doesn't mean, it was a great idea. It's just, you got to come up with new ones.
Yeah. And I can't imagine with how big LinkedIn has become in the last, I don't know, 10 years since you were talking about that, AJ, like these ideas spread like wildfire. Like I'll see someone post, oh, that's a cool copy idea. And then 2 weeks later, I see basically the same idea. I'm like, that's old at this point because it just comes and goes so quickly.
Yeah. You're totally right.
People post about it and then I see it in my inbox like 2 weeks later. And I'm like, I literally saw the person post this idea, totally different person in a different company. This person saw it and was like, I'll give it a shot. Yeah, really, really fully pulling back the curtain of like, I know where you got this from.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to end the conversation with grabbing like a big takeaway from you. If there's one thing that you want the audience to pull away from this episode, I know we've covered a lot about deliverability, email optimization, like making sure that you end up in someone's inbox and it looks good. You built a great framework, a great SCAR framework for people. Like, what's the one thing that you want someone to take away so that, like, if I am an SDR or an AE at an organization and I haven't thought about deliverability, some things I can start to do today to help improve that?
Yeah. Go to some of those tools that I mentioned. I think the biggest thing is use a tool like Glock Apps. That's going to be the first step that I'd recommend to do. That tool, you can send a piece of your email copy to it, and they're going to basically tell you the problems with it. And then from there, just dissect those problems, figure out what you may need to work on. We can put it in the show notes, but there's this really good guide that, and this is a shameless plug, but I use it myself. It's the Cold Email Academy. It's going to tell you everything about deliverability, and it's something Mailshake created a while ago that we revamp. But I can give it to you all as a link to put in there from the deliverability side of things. So go to Glock Apps, see what problems you may have, and you can solve probably some of those with the Cold Email Academy or message me too. But kind of overarching with everything else we talked about as well is like just one thing to take away as an SDR AE is like sales is simple, but simple doesn't always have to, doesn't always mean easy from these things. So like writing emails, all those things, they could be simple in the way that you write them, but it's not always easy. And just act like a human, think like a human when you're doing a lot of this outreach too.
I like that. Sales is simple, but simple isn't always easy. It's a really good way to sum it up. Awesome. Well, Maggie, thanks so much for hopping on the show and sharing some insight around deliverability with us. If people, I know you mentioned some resources that we will drop in the show notes, but if people do want to get in touch with you, continue the conversation, learn more about you and the work that you're doing, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Maggie Blume. Or you can email me at maggie@mailshake.com too. Even if it's just questions about deliverability, I'm not going to try to sell you Mailshake or anything like that unless you really need it. But I'm just here to help anyone with deliverability questions.
Awesome. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. I know I think we initially connected through the Brand 30 community, run by Andrew Mewborn. Fantastic community for helping people post on LinkedIn. And I remember the first introduction I had to you. You had a post where you mentioned someone called you Mailshake Mags. And I thought it was so funny that like there's this like such a stuffy sort of business atmosphere when you're dealing like, salesperson to salesperson, and you're like, yeah, Mailshake Mags. Do people still call you that?
You can keep calling me it if you want. I don't think it ever stuck super, super well. I was like, should I change that on LinkedIn? I'm like, I'm going to pump the brakes here. So maybe it will come now that I'm in the evangelist role. We'll see. You can keep calling me that.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. Listeners, make sure to subscribe to Unsubscribe, get more podcasts like this, tips and tricks for sales dev reps in your inbox. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again for being here, Maggie.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.